we only really recognize them when they are fruiting. And that's partly because these species are naturally cryptic.
The last couple generations seems to have lost that connectedness with the land. I think we need to get back to it.
They knew the plants because they lived in the plants.
Here in northern British Columbia, we have this kind of odd fungus in our backyard. It's really kind of exciting.
You don't want to pick something and consume something if you're not 100% sure what it is. Getting into foraging, you have to have two things typically. You have to have opportunity, and you do have to have mentorship.
There are cases where we had believed particular fungal species of mushroom had gone extinct, and then all of a sudden, that mushroom pops up again.
Mushrooms are funky that way. You think you got them figured out, and then they change their mind.
Indigenous people didn't look at plants as something that was recreational. It was a matter of survival.
You got to think about the forest and the ecology and the habitat and the animals. Like, you are part of something way bigger.
They say that the land has memory, and so the memory of our ancestors is in the land.
I'm Jennifer Cote, and I'm a wildcraft guide with Mushrooms and Mud. A wildcraft guide is someone that takes people out and educates them on the edible plants and medicinal plants in the area. And a wildcraft guide shows them what to do with the plant, whether it's edible or medicinal or functional. And yeah, just educate people on what to do with these herbs and these fungi that grows in our climate here. It started probably about 14 years ago. I was on a trail with one of my friends, and she showed me a couple plants that were edible. And she just picked a few just to show me. She's like, you should take these home and try them out. And I was really quite surprised that there was these green things on the forest floor that were edible, because I was really just used to the berries of the forest, but not actual other green vegetables of the forest. So she showed them to me, and I took them home and I tried them, and I really quite liked it. I really wanted to do a lot of healthy foods for my family. I had a young son at the time, and I just wanted to be closer, living off the land as much as possible. And so that wild food element just kind of really hit home with me. And since I was an avid hiker at the time, it just kind of all made sense to, when I'm out there, why not look for wild foods from the forest?
Here in northern British Columbia, because again, most of it is wild and has a rich history, both ecologically and culturally, and with forest disturbances, that creates a lot of variety, which naturally supports high levels of biodiversity. And I think that is a really kind of unique and just spectacular feature of our area. My name is Jonathan Cale. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Northern British Columbia, and my research program focuses on fungal ecology and forest pathology. I think professionally, and including my time as a student, I've been doing this work for about 15 years. Prior to that, I had a long interest in mushrooms and mycology and fungal ecology, stretching back, several years before I ever stepped foot in a university. I think northern British Columbia is especially unique because of the diversity of ecosystems in our landscape. So a lot of it's forested, right? The vast majority of the forested, but when you kind of zoom in, we have a lot of variety in kind of the small level features of our ecosystem. So in climate, in the dominant tree species that are there, the plant cover in the understory, and that creates a variety of habitat, a lot of diversity in habitat that is then occupied by fungi and plants, other organisms that take advantage of that.
First thing I'd like to do is to acknowledge that we are on the land of the Lheidli T'enneh. And when I go into the bush, that their ancestors, this was part of their seasonal harvest. And so I'm always honored to be on the land. And it's something as Indigenous that we always should do, no matter where we are. They say that the land has memory. And so the memory of our ancestors is in the land. When I walk with the students into the land, I say, the ground, the underneath the ground is full of mycelium that hooks up all the trees, and they all have memory. And so today you're going to lead your memory.
The last couple generations seems to have lost that connectedness with the land, and I think we need to get back to it. And in northern BC, we just have quite the abundance of local food, so why not tap into that resource? To show my kids about that abundance and that medicine on the land. And anywhere we go, we could probably find something or multiple things. When I tell them, like, okay, let's go find mushrooms, it turns into an Easter egg hunt. And they're really quite proud of themselves when they identify a wild edible mushroom and they can show me that they spotted it.
The vast majority of land plants form mycorrhizal symbiosis, mycorrhizal meaning fungus root. And this really kind of gives plants a significant advantage and probably was a major contributor to their colonization of land in the first place, way back when. This is a partnership. Fungal spore in the soil will germinate, and then the hyphae, which is kind of the strands, the mycelium, which is kind of the more network of strands, will spread out into the soil and try to find a root, and then it'll actually infect the root. What quickly forms is a partnership. So the fungus will either form kind of a sheath around the root itself, or actually penetrate into the cells of the roots and the tissue there. And what happens then is an exchange. So the fungal body is able to essentially act as roots and channels water and nutrients to the actual plant roots, thereby extending the amount of area that the roots can absorb nutrients from. So the fungus gives water and nutrients, and the plant gives sugars, carbohydrates produced by photosynthesis. And it's this kind of, it's a give more, get more type of exchange. Many plants are completely reliant upon these. Some of them cannot survive without this partnership. The ghost pipe in particular is actually a really interesting association because you have the fungus colonizing the root of the tree, and the ghost pipe actually parasitizes the fungus itself. And so the ghost pipe is kind of a symbiont, not a symbiont, but a parasite on the symbiont of a tree. So it's the kind of really weird, complex interactions we have in our forests, not just this kind of one-to-one. Many of our plants actually form these symbiotic associations with many different species of fungus at the same time. So we have whole communities of mycorrhizal fungi supporting the health of our forests.
We are so interconnected with plants. We can't live without them. And, you know, if the First Nations people had the right attitude that these are our living brothers and sisters, because when we take from them, when we take little pieces off, we trim them, and it makes them stronger, and so we help each other, and we have a symbiotic relationship, because without the plants, then we wouldn't have medicine today. Who knows where we're going to be in 10, 20 years with everything that's happening around the world. Plants are the one thing that have always, always, always been here for us. I asked the question to my students is, how did the First Nations people know what plants were used as medicine? Like, how would they know that? And the one that always comes up is, well, they tried them, trial and error. And I always say, yes, bring a buddy. Bring a good friend or not a good friend with you. I said, trial and error. I said, but remember, the Lheidli people have been here for thousands of years. They have 4 clans, and each clan was a village, and each village had 1 or 2 medicine people. So if they've been here for thousands of years and they had no written language, it's all oral, well, it's passed down, ancestral knowledge. And usually it was passed down through women, but there are a lot of males as well. And it's amazing how many children will have no idea. It's like, well, they looked at it and it was a pretty color and it smelled good. We couldn't do the same for a mushroom. We wouldn't live very long. The First Nations people also watched the animals. That was part of the learning, but through generations. 2 deer fighting, and one gets poked with an antler and has his shoulder ripped.
and they watched him go to a spruce tree and rub his whole shoulder on that tree until his whole injury was covered in pitch. And they watched him for a few weeks, and it was completely healed. And so scientists know that pitch today is antiviral, antibacterial, antimicrobial, anti-inflammatory. And so today, if you're out and you cut yourself, you just take the pitch off the tree and put it directly on, and it will start healing. They watched a bear go in digging in for grubs in the big red ant pile and got his nose all bitten up and all swollen from the ants. And they watched him go into the mint pile and rub his nose on the mint and eat mint. And so mint is cooling, anti-inflammatory.
When you get into foraging and you don't know an area, there's a general rule, and that general rule is the 1/3 rule. So 1/3 for you, 1/3 for Mother Nature, 1/3 for the animals. So this is like a general rule of thumb. So when you see, like, well, for example, a false salmon seal, when they're in a group, in a cluster, just take 1/3 of that and move on. There is more false salmon seal in the forest, I promise. So you just have to walk a little further and go get some more. And it's good exercise anyways. Plant might have a role in its ecosystem. So that's why you don't want to take everything. And I find that, like, when you are connected with the land, like, you want to go back there year after year. My motto is, if the land succeeds, you succeed. So if you take something all the time, and all of it all the time, you're not going to be able to go back there and harvest it for the future. And what's the point of that? So, like, don't get greedy. You know, in my business, I can take quite a bit of plants in an area, or berries or mushrooms in an area, but I've observed the land, and I know where to go to get more, so I can gather here and then gather there and gather there and gather there. So, but you don't know how to do that if you're not on the land a lot.
Before anybody really starts foraging for mushrooms, it's important to know what you're looking for. Okay, so go out, get yourself a field guide. Just know that you're not likely to find, well, many species that you can eat. I think that's kind of what most people go out for, trying to find edible mushrooms. There are a lot of lookalikes out there, and it's very important that you don't risk eating some of these mushrooms if you're not 100% sure on what they are. If you are one of those brave souls that does try something, even if you're certain of what it is, it's always good to just eat a little bit first and actually keep another mushroom of it off to the side, just in case it is in fact toxic and you need to go to the hospital. It's good to have a specimen, an uncooked specimen on the side, so that you can show somebody and actually try to get a accurate diagnosis so they can determine how best to treat you.
For those who use foraging, let's get out, let's get this plant, we saw this, like, take the time to go out and to get to know the plant before you harvest it. Get to know the area you're in and get to know the community. Plants are our teachers. They teach us a lot more about life than we think.
When you come up to an area and you come up on a group of plants that you want to pick, it is suggested that you walk past that group and keep walking to the next group, because that might be the only group of plants in that whole area. Maybe you might have to walk another 200 meters away. Leave that patch alone, walk a little further, and see if there's more in that area. And if there's none in your vicinity, maybe go find another patch. Go drive down the road, for example.
Just take a few mature individuals. Don't take every single one you can see. You want to leave some of those, mature mushrooms out there in the forest so that they can, deposit their spores and essentially keep the organism in our environment and playing those important roles and producing mushrooms for future generations as well. So what I like to do is, even if I'm about to collect a particular mushroom, I'll just kind of tap on the cap just to encourage spore release, just to kind of put back many more than what I'm actually taking.
Northern BC has a lot of trails, and we have a lot of logging roads that we can go explore. So don't feel like you just have to take something just right there. You got to think about the forest and the ecology and the habitat and the animals. Like, you are part of something way bigger. This is cow parsnip, and we're going to put it in bruschetta. And what we want to use is the flower stalk of the cow parsnip. And you can see here there's a small little flower bud, and what we want is this flower stalk, and we want to use the inner layer of the cow parsnip. But first we'll cut off the leaf stem and the flower bud. So cut off the leaf stem and cut off the flower bud. This flower bud is edible as well. One of my favorite ways to process this is to batter and deep fry it and dip it in a plum sauce. It's really amazing. It's a very strong taste. The flower stalk is a mild celery taste. So if you like celery, you'll like this. This has a different flavor to it, and it's quite strong. But I do enjoy a few meals of it. I'll just put that to the side. Okay, so to peel this back, one of the simplest ways is to grab a knife and then just edge into that outer layer, and then you can start peeling. You can see that it's actually quite easy to peel. You could probably even use your fingernail if you wanted to. You could substitute it in dishes that contain celery. You could put in soups and stews. You can roast it. All right, so we have our inner layer. You can actually eat this raw, and like I said, it'll taste like mild celery. You can also roast it if you want to. You can cook it up however you'd like. And then for the bruschetta, you want to cut it up into little tiny pieces. You know, some of your larger stalks, where the stalks are larger and thicker, you could probably do, you know, what you would do with celery sticks, like, you know, slathered in Cheese Whiz and do ants on a log or whatever they call it. You gotta get the cow parsnip before the flower blooms, because once the flower blooms, the flower stalk gets really quite woody and the texture gets quite hard. So right now it's at its tender stage. The sap of the cow parsnip is contained in the outer layer, but after you're done processing your bruschetta, if you want to, you can just wash your hands after. That way you can go outside and not have to worry about getting any burns. Depending on the size, the batch size of your bruschetta, you can do as many stalks as you want. Now, like, celery is not really part of a bruschetta mix, but I love this in bruschetta. It just gives it such a different dimension and a fresh dimension to the bruschetta. And it's just a good way to get familiar with cow parsnip and how to use it. Fine enough for me. All right, so now we are ready to put our bruschetta together. And what you're going to do is basically follow your favorite bruschetta recipe and then add your cow parsnip, and as much or as little as you want. I personally love the taste of this in bruschetta, so I'm going to add quite a bit. Helps give it a little bit of crunch as well. And then we have some basil. We need to do some minced garlic. Some Parmesan cheese. And a little bit of salt and pepper. And we're just gonna use a little bit of balsamic vinegar. And some olive oil. I like to prepare this dish definitely at this time of year when the cow parsnip's in season. I like to prepare it when I'm having guests over. You know, anybody who comes over to my house, you know, expects to eat something wild from my table. My pantry is not like other people's pantries. When I first started working with cow parsnip, I wanted to think about different ways to use it, and I can't quite remember how, but bruschetta kind of popped up in my mind. I said, well, what happens if I add that to bruschetta? What would it be like? And so I just tried it out, and it to me was just very brilliant. I loved the taste. I loved a little bit of crunch in it. We just love using wild foods in different things. It's kind of almost an obsession. When we are cooking something, can we add a wild element to it? Could we substitute something with it? So we're always thinking of the next way to use these foods. And to some people, these foods are obscure, so they shy away from it, they don't know how to use it. So we're trying to bring this into our everyday culinary experiences. Doing something simple as bruschetta and adding this is just something that everyone can do. So if you came to a charcuterie night at my house, this is probably what you expect to find. And it's just a small example of what we can actually do with wild foods.
I think educating the next generation is really important, especially for forage stewardship, and just really kind of appreciating, you know, the landscape that we're able to, you know, live, work, and play in.
So they get to touch things, they get to smell things, they get to see things, they get to interact with things, they get to interact with nature, wildlife, and that's how kids learn. It's a very tactile environment.
If I met you for the first time and I said, "Oh, I like that ear. I'll take that ear. I'll take that nose, and you know, I think I'll take an arm off you because I kind of like that arm." We do that with our plants. Like I see people out harvesting, and it's we need this, we need all of that, we need all of this, and it's not a matter of respect. They just take, and we would never do that with a friend. We meet someone, we want to get to know them. We want to understand their likes and dislikes, and the only way we're going to do that is that we spend time with them.
For somebody to love the outdoors and love wild plants, they have to be taught it. If they're taught it, then maybe they would want to conserve it as well.
Northern BC actually has a fantastic mycological society, mushroom foraging group, the Northern British Columbia Mycological Society. You can kind of come out and participate in a mushroom hunt first to see if it's something you're interested in. Very kid-friendly, very exciting. You never know what we're gonna find. Kind of get down and dirty with some of it as well, turning over logs and kind of, you know, walking through the bush to some degree.
One thing I find that we don't really have much nowadays is community. Food can bring community together. Wild food can bring community together.